He said she wasn't the one he wanted, but fate had already chosen differently. When a Cherokee warrior's honor collides with forbidden love, the line between capture and destiny begins to blur. Thank you so much for watching and for all your comments. Let me know at the end if you liked the story, and where you're watching from and why you're following this. The first rays of morning light filtered through the forest, casting long shadows across the Cherokee settlement nestled in the hills of northern Georgia. It was the spring of 1835, a time when tension hung in the air like morning mist. The United States government's push for Cherokee removal had created an atmosphere of uncertainty, but life in the village continued with stubborn resilience. Ayita stood at the edge of the river, her dark hair cascading down her back as she filled her clay pot with water. At 20 summers, she carried herself with quiet dignity, her movements deliberate and graceful. The daughter of a respected elder, she had been raised to honor Cherokee traditions while adapting to the changing world around them. Morning comes early for the hard-working, a deep voice called from behind her. Ayita straightened, recognizing the voice immediately. And apparently for warriors who should be resting after their journey, she replied without turning, though a small smile played at her lips. Wohali approached, his tall frame moving with the silent precision that had earned him his name, meaning eagle in Cherokee. At 25, he had already distinguished himself as a skilled hunter and respected warrior. His recent absence had been noted by many in the village, especially by Ayita, though she would never admit it openly. 3 weeks is hardly a journey, he said, coming to stand beside her, though it felt longer being away from home. His eyes lingered on her face a moment too long before turning to gaze across the water. The council speaks of your success, Ayita said, lifting her water pot. They say you tracked the men stealing our horses all the way to the Tennessee border. Wohali nodded. We recovered most of them. The thieves won't trouble our people again. Something in his tone made Ayita study him more closely. The past year had changed him. The playful boy she had known since childhood had transformed into a man burdened with responsibilities. His face, once quick to smile, now held a seriousness that came from witnessing too much too soon. Walk with me, he said suddenly, taking the heavy pot from her hands. There's something I need to tell you. They followed the river path in silence, the morning birds their only companions. When they reached a small clearing overlooking the village below, Wohali set the pot down and turned to face her. I've been asked to accompany Chief Ross to Washington, he said, his voice steady, despite the significance of his words. The council believes my knowledge of English and white ways might be useful in the negotiations. Ayita felt her heart constrict. When do you leave? 3 days. His eyes searched her face. It could be many moons before I return. The unspoken hung between them. Each passing day brought more rumors of forced removal. Some Cherokee had already voluntarily moved westward, unwilling to wait for the inevitable. Others, like Chief Ross, fought through legal means to keep their ancestral lands. Then you must go, Ayita said finally, lifting her chin. Our people need strong voices now more than ever. Wohali took a step closer. Before I leave, there's something else. His voice had dropped to almost a whisper. I've spoken with your father. Ayita's breath caught. Among their people, such words could only mean one thing. He said the decision would be yours, Wohali continued, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his features. But he would not object if you wished to become my wife upon my return. The morning seemed to still around them. In their changing world, some traditions remained sacred. The asking of permission, the woman's right to choose. And if I wished it now, before you leave? Ayita asked, her voice barely audible above the rustling leaves. A look of surprise crossed Wohali's face. Your father suggested waiting until... I'm not asking what my father suggested, Ayita interrupted, a spark of determination in her eyes. I'm asking what you want. For the first time that morning, Wohali smiled, the full, genuine smile that had been absent for too long. I want you as my wife, Ayita. Now, tomorrow, always. Then it shall be so, she replied, matching his smile with her own. For who knows what tomorrow brings? Today we have this moment. Little did they know how prophetic those words would prove to be, or how their lives would be forever altered by forces already in motion far beyond their peaceful mountain home. Later that day, as word spread of their impending union, Ayita's mother helped her prepare the wedding meal, while sharing wisdom passed down through generations. "Marriage is not merely between two people," she said, kneading dough with practiced hands. "It binds two families, two spirits, two paths into one." Wohali, meanwhile, presented Ayita's father with a freshly killed deer, a traditional offering symbolizing his ability to provide. The village buzzed with anticipation of the celebration to come, a welcome respite from the cloud of uncertainty that had hung over them for too long. 2 days after their wedding ceremony, Wohali stood at the edge of the village, his travel pack slung over his shoulder. The farewell had been private between them at dawn, away from prying eyes, but now Ayita watched from the doorway of their new home as her husband exchanged final words with the village elders. "Remember what we discussed," her father said to Wohali, placing a weathered hand on the younger man's shoulder. "Observe everything, but speak only when necessary. The white man's politics are like a river with hidden currents." Wohali nodded solemnly. "I will represent our people with honor." As the small delegation departed, Ayita returned to her daily tasks with renewed purpose. Being newly married yet immediately separated created an unusual position, but she was determined to prove herself capable in her husband's absence. The women of the village, particularly the elders, watched her with curious eyes, wondering how this strong-willed young woman would navigate her new role. "You weave the patterns too tight," her mother's sister commented one afternoon as Ayita worked on a blanket. "Your thoughts are heavy. This is not how a new bride should spend her days." Ayita's hands stilled. "And how should I spend them? Pining at the window like a lost child?" The older woman's laughter rang out unexpectedly. "There's the fire your grandmother had. Good. You'll need it in the days to come." Her expression sobered. "But remember, niece, that even the strongest river must sometimes bend around the stone rather than trying to move it." Weeks passed with no word from Washington. Summer heat settled over the mountains, and the daily rhythm of village life continued, tending crops, preparing food, gathering medicinal plants. Ayita threw herself into these tasks with a fervor that both impressed and concerned those around her. One morning, as she collected herbs in the forest, a twig snapped behind her. Ayita spun around, clutching her gathering basket defensively. A man emerged from between the trees, not Cherokee but white, dressed in the rough clothing of a frontiersman. His beard was untrimmed, his eyes wary, but not hostile. "Didn't mean to startle you, ma'am," he said, keeping his distance. "Name's Thomas Miller. I'm looking for the Cherokee settlement." Ayita regarded him cautiously. White travelers occasionally passed through seeking trade or directions, but with tensions high, strangers were viewed with suspicion. "Why do you seek our village?" she asked in careful English. Surprise flickered across his face at her fluent speech. "I carry messages from Washington," he explained, "for Chief Ross's people." Ayita's heart leapt. "The delegation has returned?" "No, ma'am. That's part of what I've come to explain." He shifted uncomfortably. "There's been complications. The talks are taking longer than expected." Something in his tone made Ayita's chest tighten. "Follow me," she said after a moment's hesitation. "The elders will want to hear your news." The council gathered quickly once word spread of the messenger's arrival. Thomas Miller stood respectfully before the assembled leaders, hat in hand, as he delivered his report. "The delegation is safe," he assured them, "but President Jackson refuses to honor the Supreme Court's ruling. There's talk of forced removal if the Cherokee don't agree to the terms voluntarily." Murmurs rippled through the gathering. Ayita, standing at the back, felt a chill despite the summer heat. "And what of our representatives?" asked an elder. "When will they return?" "Chief Ross remains to continue fighting through legal channels," Miller replied. "He sent some of the younger men back with documents and instructions." He hesitated. "They should arrive within the week." Ayita hardly heard the rest of the discussion. Wohali would be returning. After nearly 3 months of separation, she would see her husband again. Yet the news he carried cast a shadow over her anticipation. True to Miller's word, 5 days later, the returning delegates arrived. The village gathered to welcome them home and hear the news from Washington firsthand. Ayita stood with the other women, scanning the approaching riders anxiously. She spotted Wohali immediately. his straight posture, the distinctive eagle feather in his hat. Their eyes met across the distance, and for a brief moment, everything else faded away. Then she noticed his expression. Where there should have been joy at homecoming, there was only grim determination. That evening, after the public council meeting where the returning delegates shared their report, Wohali finally returned to their home. He stood in the doorway for a long moment, as if reacquainting himself with the place, with her. "You've changed," Ayita said softly, noticing the new lines around his eyes, the more pronounced set of his jaw. "As have you," he replied, finally stepping forward to take her hands in his. "You're more beautiful than in my memories. And you've learned to speak empty flattery like the white politicians," she countered, though a smile tugged at her lips. His laugh was short but genuine. "I've missed your sharp tongue." They sat together by the fire, and gradually the formality between them melted away. Wohali described the grandeur and squalor of Washington, the indifference of government officials, the determination of Chief Ross despite mounting obstacles. "They speak of our lands as if they already own them," he said, staring into the flames. "They call it progress and civilization while plotting to take everything we have." Ayita listened silently, letting him unburden himself. When he finally fell quiet, she asked the question weighing heaviest on her mind. "What happens now?" Wohali's eyes met hers, conflict visible in their depths. "Chief Ross believes we can still win through the white man's courts. Others say we should prepare for the journey west before winter comes." He paused. "The council is divided. And you?" Ayita pressed. "What do you believe?" "I believe," he said slowly, "that whatever comes, we face it together." He reached for her hand. "I shouldn't have left so soon after our marriage. These months apart were necessary," Ayita finished for him. "You were where you needed to be, as was I." Later that night, as they lay together in the privacy of their home, the world outside temporarily forgotten, Ayita traced the contours of her husband's face in the dim firelight. "Tell me something true," she whispered. "Not what you told the council, or what you think I want to hear." Wohali was quiet for so long she thought he might have drifted to sleep. Then he spoke, his voice barely audible. "I'm afraid," he admitted. "Not of the journey itself, if it comes to that, but of what we might lose along the way that can never be recovered." Ayita pressed closer to him, their heartbeats aligning in the darkness. "Then we must hold tighter to what matters most," she murmured against his skin, "so that no distance, no hardship can take it from us." The autumn of 1835 brought crisp winds down from the mountains and a steady stream of disturbing news. Throughout the Cherokee territories, tension mounted as government agents increased pressure for removal westward. Stories circulated of other tribes who had already been forced from their lands, of hardships endured on the long journey, of broken promises and insufficient provisions. In their village, life took on an air of suspended anticipation. Some families began quietly preparing for the possibility of removal, packing away precious items, discussing what could be transported and what might need to be left behind. Others, following Chief Ross's example, refused to make such preparations, believing it would signal acceptance of an unjust policy. Wohali found himself caught between these positions. In the months since his return from Washington, he had become one of the council's most trusted voices, respected for both his first-hand knowledge of the government's intentions and his thoughtful approach to the crisis. Yet privately, with Ayita, he expressed growing concern. "Ross places too much faith in the white man's laws," he confided one evening as they walked along the river. "The same laws that now work against us." Ayita, who had been collecting river clay for pottery, paused to study her husband's troubled face. "You think removal is inevitable." It wasn't a question, and Wohali didn't treat it as one. "I think we must prepare for all possibilities while continuing to fight." He picked up a flat stone and skimmed it across the water's surface. "Including the possibility that our people may be divided on what path to take." His words proved prophetic. In December, news arrived that a small faction of Cherokee leaders, without authorization from Chief Ross or the tribal council, had signed the Treaty of New Echota with U.S. representatives. This splinter group, known as the Treaty Party, had agreed to cede all Cherokee lands east of the Mississippi in exchange for territory in the West and financial compensation. The village erupted in outrage. A hasty council meeting was called, where angry voices denounced the treaty signers as traitors. Wohali, though equally disturbed by the development, urged caution. "Division among ourselves only strengthens our opponents," he reminded the gathering. "We must stand united behind Chief Ross as he challenges this false treaty." But privately he began making preparations. Without announcing their intentions, he and Ayita started setting aside dried foods, seeds, tools, items that would be essential if forced removal became reality. "You're wise to plan," Ayita's father told her one day, catching her packing away her mother's old recipes written in Sequoia's syllabary. "But take care not to spread fear." "Is it fear to face what may come?" she challenged. "Or wisdom?" The old man sighed heavily. "Both, perhaps. The line between them has always been thin." He touched the papers she held. "Make copies. Leave some behind in safe places. Our words, our stories, they must survive even if we are scattered." Winter deepened, bringing heavy snow to the mountains. In January, word came that President Jackson had submitted the Treaty of New Echota to the U.S. Senate for ratification, ignoring formal protests from Chief Ross and the majority of Cherokee people who opposed it. One bitterly cold evening, as Wohali and Ayita sat by their fire discussing the latest news, an urgent knock came at their door. Standing outside, snow crusting his shoulders, was Thomas Miller, the white messenger who had delivered news from Washington months before. "Forgive the intrusion," he said, stamping snow from his boots as they ushered him inside. "I've been traveling for days to reach the outlying villages." "What news?" Wohali asked, already retrieving a blanket for the shivering man. Miller accepted a cup of hot tea from Ayita before answering. "The Senate is expected to ratify the treaty by spring. Once that happens, the government will give all Cherokee 2 years to voluntarily relocate before—" He trailed off, his discomfort evident. "Before they force us out at gunpoint," Wohali finished flatly. Miller nodded grimly. "I've come because Chief Ross asked me to spread word to prepare, while he continues fighting through legal challenges." After the messenger had warmed himself and departed to continue his journey, Wohali and Ayita sat in troubled silence. 2 years, Ayita finally said. "That's something, at least." "Perhaps less," Wohali replied. "Once the treaty is ratified, land speculators and settlers won't wait for the official deadline. They'll begin claiming land, forcing confrontations." Ayita moved to sit beside him, taking his hand in hers. "Then we must decide, husband. Do we stay and fight alongside Ross until the very end, or do we prepare to leave on our own terms before we're forced?" The question hung between them, heavy with implications. They both understood that whatever choice they made would shape not only their future, but potentially their relationship with their community and families. "There's another possibility," Wohali said slowly, an idea clearly forming as he spoke. "Some of our people have found refuge in the mountains of North Carolina. The terrain is difficult for soldiers to navigate, and some friendly white settlers there have opposed removal." "You think we should hide?" Ayita asked, surprised. It seemed unlike the forthright warrior she had married. "Not hide," he corrected. "Strategically relocate. Preserve our way of life while the political battle continues." We wouldn't be the first to make this choice. In the following weeks, as winter gradually loosened its grip on the mountains, Wohali and Ayita carefully discussed this possibility with a few trusted family members and friends. Some were immediately supportive, seeing it as a practical compromise. Others worried about dividing the community further at a critical time. "Whatever we decide," Ayita told her mother during a private conversation, "it must be soon. The treaty will be ratified by May if Miller's information is correct." Her mother, a woman who had seen much change in her lifetime, nodded pensively. "When I was a girl, my grandmother told stories of how our people came to these mountains long ago, fleeing troubles elsewhere. She said the mountains themselves protected us, hid us, became part of us." She squeezed Ayita's hand. "Perhaps they will do so again." As March brought the first signs of spring, Wohali returned from a council meeting with decisive news. The Senate had ratified the Treaty of New Echota by a single vote, setting in motion the 2-year countdown to mandatory removal. Ross still believes he can overturn this, Wohali reported. He's planning a trip to Washington to appeal directly to the new president once Van Buren takes office. And you? Ayita asked. What do you believe now? Wohali took both her hands in his expression solemn. I believe we must survive to keep our culture alive. I've made contact with Cherokee families near the Oconaluftee River in North Carolina. They've offered us sanctuary. When would we leave? Ayita asked, her voice steady despite the gravity of the decision. After the planting, he replied. We'll help establish this year's crops for those who stay, then depart before summer heat makes travel difficult. That night, lying awake beside her sleeping husband, Ayita felt the weight of impending change pressing down upon her. They would be leaving the only home she had ever known, the land where generations of her ancestors were buried. Yet within that sorrow was a thread of fierce determination. They would not be forced westward at the point of a bayonet. They would choose their own path, preserve what they could of their way of life, their language, their stories. We are more than this land, she whispered to herself, an affirmation against the grief. We carry our home within us. The early summer morning dawned clear and bright as Ayita placed the last of their belongings into the pack. Their departure, planned for weeks in careful secrecy, had finally arrived. A small group, 3 families including their own, would travel together to the Cherokee settlements in the North Carolina mountains. Are you certain you won't reconsider? Ayita's father asked, standing in the doorway of the home she had shared with Wohali. His face, weathered by years under the Georgia sun, showed both understanding and sorrow. We've made our decision, Ayita replied, straightening to face him. This isn't farewell forever. Once the situation resolves, we'll return, or you can join us. Her father nodded slowly. Your mother and I will remain with the main band for now. Chief Ross still believes his delegation to Washington may succeed. I pray he's right, Wohali said, entering with the last of their provisions. But we've seen how the government regards treaties and court decisions when it comes to Indian land. Outside, the others in their traveling party were making final preparations. They had agreed to leave before dawn, avoiding the attention their departure might otherwise draw. Not everyone in the village supported their decision to separate from the main Cherokee body, seeing it as undermining Ross's authority and the tribe's unity. Ayita embraced her parents one last time, fighting back tears. Remember what grandmother taught us, her mother whispered. The land knows us wherever we walk upon it. With packs secured and final goodbyes exchanged, the small band set out along the hidden trails that would lead them northeast toward the mountains. Wohali took the lead, having scouted the route weeks earlier. Ayita followed close behind with the others, including 2 children, maintaining a steady pace behind them. They traveled in near silence, each lost in their own thoughts about what they were leaving behind and what uncertain future lay ahead. The familiar forests and streams that had been their home since birth now seemed to take on new significance, each landmark committed to memory, as if for the last time. By midday, they had covered significant ground, the village far behind them. They stopped briefly to rest and eat near a small creek, the children finally allowed to speak in hushed tones. How much farther? Asked Adahi, a boy of about 10 summers whose family had joined their group. Several days' journey, Wohali answered kindly, but we'll take it one day at a time. As they prepared to continue, a sound in the underbrush made them freeze. Wohali motioned for silence, hand moving to the knife at his belt. A moment later, a figure emerged from between the trees. Thomas Miller, the white messenger who had become an unexpected ally to their people. I thought I might find you on this trail, he said quietly, raising his empty hands to show he meant no harm. Why are you following us? Wohali demanded, still wary despite their previous interactions. Miller approached slowly. To warn you. Government agents are already moving through Cherokee territory, mapping lands for distribution to white settlers. They are accompanied by militia in some areas. A tense silence followed this news. Ayita exchanged glances with the others in their party. We've chosen our route carefully, Wohali said finally, away from the main roads. Even so, Miller continued, You should know that some locals have been forming search parties looking for Cherokee who might be hiding valuable possessions before removal. He hesitated, then added, Not all white men in these parts support what's happening, but enough do to make your journey dangerous. Ayita stepped forward. Why help us? What do you gain? Miller's weathered face showed genuine discomfort at the question. My wife was half Cherokee, he said after a moment. She died 3 winters ago, but her grandmother was among those forced to hide in these mountains during the Revolution. He shrugged, unable to complete the thought. After a brief discussion, they accepted Miller's offer to guide them along less traveled routes. His knowledge of which white settlements to avoid could prove invaluable. They resumed their journey with renewed urgency, now even more aware of the dangers surrounding them. For 4 days, they traveled steadily northeastward, sleeping in makeshift shelters and maintaining vigilant watches. On the morning of the 5th day, as they crossed a high ridge, Miller pointed toward distant peaks shrouded in mist. The Smoky Mountains, he said. Cherokee settlements there have managed to remain largely undisturbed so far. Once you cross into North Carolina territory, you'll find friends waiting. That afternoon, as they descended toward a valley that would lead them to their destination, disaster struck. The sharp crack of a rifle shot echoed through the trees, sending birds scattering from branches overhead. Their group dropped instinctively, seeking cover. There! Wohali hissed, indicating movement through the trees to their left. 3, maybe 4 men. Land hunters, Miller whispered grimly, looking for Cherokee to clear off their new property. Another shot rang out closer this time, followed by coarse shouting. We know you're there, Injuns. This land's been deeded to proper Americans now. Ayita pulled the terrified children close, shielding them with her body behind a fallen log. The other adults spread out, prepared to defend their group if necessary. We need to split up, Wohali decided quickly. Create confusion, multiple trails. Miller nodded in agreement. I can lead them away. Buy you time to reach the settlement. No, Ayita protested, it's too dangerous. I know these men and their kind, Miller insisted. They won't shoot a white man without provocation. I can spin a tale to send them in the wrong direction. After a hurried consultation, they formed a plan. Miller would create a diversion, while the Cherokee families separated into smaller groups, using different routes to reach their destination. They would reunite at a predetermined point near the North Carolina settlement. I'll find you when I can, Miller promised as they prepared to separate. Wohali clasped the man's arm in gratitude. May your path be safe, friend. Ayita led one of the children and his mother eastward through a dense thicket, while Wohali took another route with the remaining family. Behind them, they heard Miller crashing deliberately through the underbrush, calling out to the pursuers as if he'd encountered them by chance while hunting. The next hours were a blur of careful movement, hiding, listening, and moving again. By nightfall, Ayita and her companions had reached the agreed meeting place, a distinctive rock formation overlooking a small valley. To her immense relief, Wohali and the others arrived shortly after, unharmed. Of Miller, there was no sign. They waited until dawn, but when the messenger didn't appear, they were forced to continue without him, hoping he had successfully diverted their pursuers and would find his own way to safety. 2 days later, exhausted but hopeful, they crested a final ridge and looked down upon a small Cherokee settlement nestled in a protected cove. Smoke rose from several dwellings, and in cleared fields, crops grew in neat rows. Children played near a stream while women worked at outdoor tasks. It was a scene of peaceful normalcy that brought tears to Ayita's eyes, a stark contrast to the tension and fear that had dominated their own village in recent months. As they descended toward the settlement, a group came out to meet them. An older man stepped forward, his expression cautious but not unwelcoming. I am Siskwa, he said in Cherokee. Our cousin Adohi told us to expect travelers from Georgia. Wohali stepped forward, explaining their journey and their hope for sanctuary. As they spoke, Ayita observed the settlement more closely. Though smaller than their home village, it appeared well established and organized. Most importantly, it felt secure, protected by the surrounding mountains and its relative isolation. That evening, as the newcomers shared a meal with their hosts, Siskwa explained how their community had managed to remain independent. When removal talk first began years ago, Our ancestors moved deeper into these mountains, he said. Some married into local white families who opposed Indian removal. Others simply disappeared from government records. When officials come looking, which is rare, we are just poor mountain folk to them. And this has worked? Wohali asked, skeptical but impressed. Tsiskwa's weathered face creased in a smile. We are still here, are we not? While others are forced westward, we keep our ways alive in the land of our ancestors. Later, as they settled into the small cabin provided for them, Ayita and Wohali finally had a moment alone to reflect on their journey and new circumstances. It's not the life we planned, Ayita said softly, unpacking the few precious items they had carried with them. Her mother's pottery tools, seeds from their home garden, a blanket woven with traditional patterns. No, Wohali agreed, taking her hand in his. But we're together, we're free, and we're still Cherokee, no matter where we live. Ayita leaned against his shoulder, feeling both the fatigue of their journey and a cautious hope for their future. What do you think happened to Miller? I believe he's safe, Wohali replied after a moment's consideration. He survived in these borderlands for years. Perhaps one day he'll find his way here. As darkness fell over the mountain settlement, Ayita stepped outside to look at the stars. The same stars that shone over their abandoned home in Georgia, over the Cherokee being forced westward, over all the scattered fragments of their people trying to preserve their way of life against overwhelming odds. We will endure, she whispered to herself and to the night. Our stories will be told. Our children will know who they are and where they came from. Beside her, Wohali slipped an arm around her waist. And we will make new stories here, he added. Stories of survival, of adaptation, of hope. In the distance, an owl called, once, twice, 3 times. According to Cherokee belief, the owl was a messenger, sometimes of warning, sometimes of change. Tonight, Ayita chose to interpret its call as affirmation. They had lost much, but they had saved what mattered most. Their freedom, their identity, and their future together. In this sheltered mountain cove, surrounded by others who had made the same choice, they would build a new life while honoring the old ways. As spring turned to summer, and summer to fall, Ayita and Wohali became integral members of the mountain community. News occasionally reached them of the forced removal happening in other Cherokee territories, what would later be called the Trail of Tears, confirming the wisdom of their difficult decision. And when winter came again, bringing snow to their mountain sanctuary, Ayita shared joyful news with her husband. New life was growing within her, a child who would be born free in Cherokee land, carrying forward their heritage despite all attempts to erase it. I'm not the one you want, she had once whispered when Wohali first spoke of marriage, uncertain of her place in a changing world. Now, as they faced that world together, she knew with absolute certainty they had found exactly where they belonged.